He graduated from St. Mary's Grade School in 1949, Newton Community High School in 1953. He continued his education at the University of Illinois, graduating with a degree in agricultural engineering in 1958. In 1959, he entered the U.S. Army as a second lieutenant, completed the Corps of Engineering School, Airborne School, and U.S. Army Flight School. Sent to Vietnam in 1962, and during his tour he flew twin-engine turboprop Mohawks, carrying 50 caliber machine guns and 2.75-inch rockets. In 1965, he was home, married Janice Finley from Newton, returned to Vietnam in 1966 with the 1st Infantry Division, flying mostly helicopters. He was his primary assignment was the command aircraft carrier for the commanding general of the 1st Division. Ken has a unique perspective of Vietnam. He was there very early when we were first there. His second tour was when he was there. It was escalating, and he had information, was with some of the guys making the decisions. So may I present Ken Stone.
Thank you, and thank Pat and the foundation for inviting me. I appreciate that. When Pat asked me to do this, I thought, oh, there'd be 10 or 15 people there. What did I expect to have the whole room full? And this room has a special meaning for Jan and me. 50 years ago, we got married and had our wedding dates here. So, as I recall, the band that's over there with Jimmy Hahn, and I think Jan said our table is right back here someplace. So, at any rate, I just would make special mention of Annette doing that DVD. It's a fantastic job. I've got a copy, and for those of you who don't have a copy, I would encourage you to buy one. It shows all the St. Reed people that participated in various wars from the First World War on down, of course. Some of you might know that I did the first study in the country as an academic on Walmart and the impacts that it had on small towns and on various businesses. And that kind of took on a life of its own. And I've given about 1,000 seminars over the world on that, to the point where I could do it in my sleep. This talk is different. This is the first time I've given one of these in 50 years, with the exception of my wife's family kind of talked me into doing one at the Methodist Church when I first got back from Vietnam in 1967. So don't expect perfection, because I'm a little rusty at this. At any rate, these two tours we had, 1962 to 63, and then the second tour was 66, 67. And I was single the first tour, and of course married the second tour. And I would say that I've got my own views expressed here a few times. I know we have several Vietnam vets in the audience. Your views may be different from mine, and other people's views may be different, but that's what this country's about. So you can have different views on different things. So at any rate, we'll go ahead and get started here, and I'm not quite sure. I think I might try to move this around here. I just kind of did an overview so that you get a general idea what I'm going to talk about. First of all, a disclaimer, I knew quite a bit about the Army and the Air Force operations while I was there, but I really didn't know much about what the Navy and Marines are doing. So for any Navy or Marine veterans in the crowd, pardon me, I don't know much about what you're doing. I think the overwhelming reason the war turned out so badly was because so many civilians were killed, wounded, or harassed, and you'll see more about that in just a little bit here. Third thing, body count syndrome. The first real action I had was, came back and I was debriefed by somebody from higher headquarters, and he demanded to know how many people we killed. And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, I got to have a number. Got to turn it into higher headquarters. Was it 15? No. Was it 10? No. How about 8? Well, maybe, no, but I can guarantee you from an airplane flying at 200 miles an hour at 1,000 foot or 2,000 foot, you can't tell. And so it was a guess, and there were a lot of guesses over the years about body count, and it got us into a lot of trouble. I'll tell you another story about that in a little bit. The U.S. forces, I think, were disadvantaged by not knowing the language, the history, or the customs. We went over there completely cold. I didn't have a clue what I was getting into. All I was told was I was going to fight communism my first tour, and that was about it. At any rate, a little perspective on the number of deaths we had nationwide in the wars that had the highest number killed. World War II had 405,000, nearly 406,000 combat deaths. Now, there were a lot of people wounded during that war, and I don't know the figures for those, how many of those wounded people turned into deaths, but I'm sure a lot of them probably. Civil War had the next most of 364,000. These are combat deaths. And the sad thing about this is it only shows the figures for the North, it doesn't show the figures for the South. So, and the South, and there were more combat deaths than there were in World War II. World War I had 116,000 deaths. Vietnam, 58,300. The amazing thing about the Vietnam War and all the other wars is there are still a lot of missing people. There are 2,000 missing people yet from Vietnam War. And from Second World War, there's a lot more than that, but we just gradually keep finding a few more. Then Korean War, 36,000, and the global war on terror, everything from 2001 to the present, 6,400. And all of these, in more recent years, we've been made much more aware of all the wounds, the wounded people, and all the terrible wounds that come back out of those wars. So, not a very pretty sight. For those of you who aren't familiar with where Vietnam is, this is Vietnam, the snake-looking projection here. And you can see it's bordered by China up here and what used to be called Burma over here, Thailand. Then the ones that are adjacent, Laos up here and Cambodia here. You probably heard of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It probably started up in here and came all the way down the border, right down to the south part of the country. My first tour, I was stationed in Nha Trang, right here. At the time, it was somebody else wants in, I guess. Time it was only about 50,000 population, but my family and I went back to Vietnam in 1998 in peacetime, supposedly. And I think it was 250,000 people at that time. It had grown that much in that short period of time. It was a coastal city, had a beautiful beach. And then my second tour was just north of what was then called Saigon, is now called Ho Chi Minh City. And I was with the 1st Infantry Division there. Just a little bit about how it all got started. When I graduated from flight school in 1960, I guess it was, I was assigned to a unit at Fort Rucker, Alabama called Aerial Surveillance and Target Acquisition. We had airplanes that had side-looking radar on and look off to the side and pick up moving targets. We could take aerial photographs. And we also had drones. Nobody had ever heard of drones in those days except for us. So we think of drones being something that's only happened in the last few years. We hear about it all the time now, but we had them back in 1962. They weren't as sophisticated as they are now, but we had them. At any rate, my boss was a major, and he got called to the Pentagon about 3 times in the spring of '62. And always hush-hush. We never did know for sure what was going on. And about May or June of '62, he told us all that we were going to Vietnam on secret orders. He couldn't tell anybody about it, including your parents or your spouse or anybody else. And of course, I was a bachelor then, and I had to call my parents and see if they'd come down and pick up my car, because my entire belongings were in my car and a lot of good stuff in the trunk of it. And sure enough, they agreed to come. The day they were to arrive, I went to the officers' club to have lunch, and when I came out, I saw these 2 grizzly-looking guys with big, long beards, and I thought, who are they? And all of a sudden, I saw my mom and my sister Shirley. It was my dad and my son, or my brother-in-law, because if you recall, 1962 was the 125th anniversary, and everything ready for that. So, at any rate, they faked me out for a while, but they did take my car home. So anyhow, what the big wigs in Washington decided was that we would take our little unit and use it as a nucleus to build a special unit to send to Vietnam. Again, most of us didn't even know where Vietnam was at the time. And they were going to give 6 of these Mohawks, which was a new airplane that had been designed for the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps turned it down for some reason of it. But it would shoot weapons. It had hard points to shoot rockets and machine guns and bombs and everything off of it. But it also had great surveillance capability. So, long story short, we very rapidly brought in all the pilots that were qualified in Mohawk at the time. It was a brand new airplane, not many. I was in 1st class. But brought them in, and about 100 enlisted people. And how are we going to shoot these things? We don't know anything about it. So they got a deal with the Navy and Marine Corps to send us down to Jacksonville Naval Air Station in Jacksonville, Florida. And the Navy spent about 2 weeks trying to teach us how to shoot these things. So when we went to Viet Nam, we knew a little bit about how to shoot things off an airplane. So it turned out that I and 2 other people were on the advance party, and we were sent over to get the thing ready for them to come. There were no facilities at all over there, and long story short again, I was the only engineer in the group. One of the guys had to go home early because his wife was sick, so there was just 2 of us. I had to go in the Trang and led a contract with a builder who couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak Vietnamese, and to build this tent city, and it was going to be 25 tents and a hall to eating hall and dining hall, and I think that'd be a party room. That was it. And I got the low bid was $25,000, and you'll see some pictures here in just a moment. Going into Saigon in 1962 was a sight to behold. It was just a smoky, messy, crowded, really different place than St. Marie or and there must have been something special going on this day. There were all these little Lambrettas, little 3-wheeled jollies that hold about 6 or 7 people, you know, like taxi service. And then I got sent to Nha Trang, where we were going to be based, and trying to build this tent city. And Nha Trang, as I said, was a little town, roughly 25, 50,000 people at the time, right on the South China Sea, beautiful beach. Had not many crowds at all, sidewalk vendors. This little gal I caught carrying, and this is the standard way to carry things, so those of you who've been to Vietnam know, recognize that. 2 5-gallon cans of water over her shoulder, probably 8 years old. I don't think I could do that today, to be honest with you. That was the main means of transportation. Here's the mountain people coming in with their products to sell. This was some brown sugar coming into town to be sold. And the main method of motivation of pulling plows and things like that over there is the water buffalo. And they usually send one of the fairly young boys out to look after those things while they're grazing. And here's one that actually was riding his. And I just want to give you a feel for what you run into when you go to a new country, a strange country. I just worked for International Harvester for a while, and it turns out that I was shocked when I found this ad there for a crawler. I don't think I ever saw an International Harvester dozer there the whole time I was there, but they had high hopes they were going to sell some, I think. Okay, here's our tent city then. They had the specs called for 4 inches of concrete so that a 6-person tent could be put over it. And it was all going to be temporary at first, but it's set up so that we could make it more permanent as time goes on. You can't see this very well, and I apologize for the people in the back. We didn't expect this big crowd, I don't think. All the hard work here is being done by women. And it turns out the supervisors are the guys. And if you notice, not much has changed.
Yeah.
If you'll notice, these gals are all carrying these things, all the sand, gravel, everything was carrying these things. I didn't see a wheelbarrow the whole time I was in Vietnam, to be honest with you. This is the way they move things. And even when they mixed the concrete by hand, they would put it in these buckets here and carry it over and dump it out by hand and screed it by hand. It was a very primitive type operation. Finally, here's what the tent city looked like just before our main body got there. The main body, I might say, was in the Philippines. They had gone to the Philippines, and they thought they were going to come over just right away. Fortunately, they didn't, because it took a while for me to get this built. It turned out that the admiral, who was commander-in-chief of the Pacific, had never been told that we were coming or what we were going to be doing. When he found out we were bringing airplanes over to shoot rockets and machine guns and so on, all heck broke loose. And so they held a group in the Philippines for a month trying to figure out all these high meetings in Washington, what was going to happen. So it turned out, the rules of engagement turned out to be we could carry only machine guns and rockets. We could not fire unless we were fired at first, and we had to carry a Vietnamese observer in the right seat. So that was the way we entered the country. And the main body finally came, and they came on an LST, just pulled right up to the beach and unloaded everything. The airplanes came, 6 Mohawks. I'll have you a better picture of the Mohawk in a minute, probably. And one of my best friends lost an engine coming across. but you can fly on one engine, so he made it the rest of the way. And it turned out, though, they got a bunch of bad oil in the Philippines, and we started losing engines like crazy, so they had to get rid of all the old oil and get some new oil. Here's one of the Marines that helped train us back in Florida and came along with us. This is, as you veterans know, in more recent wars, we always hire a lot of the local civilians to help do a lot of the kitchen work and work around the place, and that's what these guys are. These three are kitchen helpers. This was our houseboy, and this is a houseboy. And what they do is shine your shoes and sweep the place out, take your laundry down and get it done, and so on. Turns out that, again, because of our naivete, most of us had manuals for the airplane and so on, but they'd become obsolete and they'd give you new ones, and we just toss those in the trash bin. Next thing you know, we caught this little guy, this little guy, dig him out, and we're pretty sure he was giving them to the bad guys. So, because it had the speeds of the airplane, the lakes of the airplane, the dimensions and all that stuff that would have been very useful to them. The officers had to have 4 to a tent. They always got preferential treatment, you know. And this is what my corner of the tent looked like. But we had to have one Vietnamese observer in the tent with us. This is what the Vietnamese observers looked like. They're really very, at the time, were really very small people, maybe about 5 foot tall and 80 pounds to 85 pounds. As you go to Vietnam now and see Vietnamese students in the States and so on, they're getting much bigger. I guess nutrition, I assume, and genetics, I don't know, but nevertheless, these guys were really small. Here was my tent mate, and unfortunately, he got killed about a month or 2 after this was taken. That was a whole other story, but he was flying with one of my best friends, a West Point graduate. He was married and had one child at home and one on the way. And they just disappeared one day. No radio transmissions or anything. And we got all the aircraft in that part of the country looking for him for over a week, no sign. And finally we gave up and went back to work. A year later, the Vietnamese patrol found these guys crashed into the side of a mountain, and neither one of them got out of their ejection seats. They just flew right into the mountain, it looked like. So anyhow, I was assistant operations officer for a while this first tour, and most of the Vietnamese observers are very reserved and very quiet, except for this one. he was a real loudmouth and a real character, and so anyhow, one of these pictures taken with me. Some of the primitive things that were used in those days. This is a booby trap that was stuck in the ground alongside a path where Americans or Vietnamese would be walking. Had a tripwire, had some bullets in here, some rounds, pistol rounds, or maybe small arms rounds of some kind. And when you hit the tripwire, it flipped this mousetrap looking thing up and set off the bullets which would go across the path and hopefully strike somebody. So, and even more primitive, this one was set up to shoot shotgun shells. You can see the bigger holes there. And this guy that's holding that, I'll get to him in just a moment. Our first mission over there was, it takes a while for the powers that be to figure out what you're going to do, was to patrol the narrow gauge railroad that ran out of Saigon up north. And what was happening was the Viet Cong were prying out these rails on the supply trains that were bringing supplies and stuff like that to the northern part of the country, and they would derail the train, and then the bad guys would run in and steal what they could while the train was sitting on the side. And so we were patrolling this every day and try to keep that from happening. Turned out we took off at first light every morning, and we flew about an hour north, and then we turned around and flew about an hour south at about 100-foot elevation, altitude. And after a while, it really got boring, and everybody in the unit was saying, well, if this is all there is, what are we doing here? Then all of a sudden, one day, a guy came back with 2 or 3 bullets in his airplane, and then started doing a little more exciting. The point is, again, we were so naive, we didn't realize that once you set a pattern going to the same place every day at the same time, something bad is going to happen to you. And that's where it all started, it seemed like. I think I'll just pass. This is a strategic handbook where it was designed to keep the good people in, the bad people out, and it had these sharpened bamboo spikes and this trench all the way around. The problem is they forgot that you could shoot munitions over the top of it, and furthermore, they always had a big gate that anybody could walk through, so it was kind of ridiculous. Here's a Viet Cong flag, and here's Ed Cribb, another sad story. He was the youngest pilot we had, kind of a wild cowboy type, nice guy. Again, wife and small child back home with a wife pregnant, expecting another. And I shouldn't take too long to tell the story, but it's an interesting story that he and another guy were flying side by side, and he got one engine hit and couldn't make it over the top of the mountain. He saw they were going to crash, and he tried to get the observer to eject, and he couldn't get him to eject. And finally, Ed ejected just before they hit the mountain, and kind of free fell down through a bunch of trees, and ended up about 3 foot off the ground. His feet 3 foot off the ground. He always carried a .357 Magnum and a knife and all the other things that you're supposed to carry when you're flying. He just was in a state of shock. Apparently, walked away from him and blundered around for a while, and then found that observer whose seat went off on impact, who was in terrible shape, started carrying him around, and then realized, I can't do this anymore. He set him down, and he came to his senses and found a stream there. And streams in that part of the country, he followed him. They went out to the South China Sea. They went east, and so he started following that. And of course, they found him at that point. And I was on duty the night he came in. His flight suit was in shreds. He had 60-some leeches on him, and no broken bones. Went to the hospital for a couple of days. Came out and started flying it. The rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say when he was alive, was that just after I came back to the States in '63, he got hit again, and one engine caught fire. He extinguished it. Next, other engine got hit. He extinguished it, and of course, they had no choice but to bail out at that point. And so he tried to get the observer to bail out, which he did. Everything seemed to work fine. He bailed out, and his chute didn't open. He free fell all the way to the ground. So he was lucky the first time, but not so lucky the second. I got hundreds of pictures of bullet holes, but here's one here. Went in, they typically would, the small arms fire for the most part. Thank God they didn't have guided missiles at that point, where we were at least. Here's another one, and a lot of times those would wound the observer if they were on that side. The crew chiefs got to where they were putting Purple Hearts on the airplane for every bullet hole they got. And I was one of the lucky ones. I didn't fly missions for a while after we got there, since I was assistant operations officer. But when I did start flying, nothing ever happened. And I came back one day, and the crew chief and all the people working the flight line were really excited about something. And finally, when I got out of the cockpit, they said, look here, and I had 16 holes in the airplane, but not a single one came near the cockpit. Not a single one hit an oil line or a hydraulic line. Just a lucky guess. Then, just to show you that the bad guys were getting interested in shooting us down, this is an aerial photograph of a training ground we had up near the mountains. These are twin-engine airplanes. We were the only twin-engine airplane working in the States up there at that time. And you can see they got an arrow here to show you're supposed to lead these things. If you shoot right at them, you're going to miss them. You got to lead them. And so anyhow, we thought that was kind of interesting. Here's what a 2.75-inch rocket looks like. We carried 19 in each one of these pods. These pods look like a short hot water heater. We could carry 2 on each side, or 1 of these and a machine gun on each side. So a fairly lethal weapon. Then we lost 2 airplanes right away, and we had 2 more come in to the Philippines on an old World War II carrier. That's what this is. And here they're hoisting them off, and I was lucky enough to get to go to the Philippines in January and fly one of these back. When they prepare them for shipping across the ocean on a carrier like that, they spray them with this vinyl type stuff. It's just like rubber, and it completely seals it off so the salt water doesn't get into it. But you see, you got to peel it all off again before you try to fly it. Bottom line is, toward the end, we were flying close support. We had a lot of Rangers that were advising Vietnamese units at that time, and they knew that they could call us and they'd get support immediately. So that's a lot of what we were doing. But the bottom line for us after a year was we had 2 pilots dead, 3 Vietnamese observers dead, several pilots observers wounded and 4 aircraft crashed. So that was kind of interesting. First year when most people didn't even know before Vietnam was in 62 or 63. My second tour, 66, 67, was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division. I flew a Mohawk, that a plane you saw in the last few slides there, with a side-looking aerial radar. This thing looked like a telephone pole that was slung underneath the airplane, but it looked out to the side about 30 miles and to pick up any moving target that was going faster than 5 miles an hour. So we could pick up bicycles or anything bigger than that was moving very fast at all. And let's see. Well, I'll go to the next slide. When I flew in this time, it was a little easier. We moved direct to Japan, and then from Japan to Vietnam. But then went to Bien Hoa, and Bien Hoa was the replacement depot. And there's all these sheds here where the troops from the field come in, they're filthy, they've got ragged clothes on, they clean up, and they're ready to go home. And I think these guys here are ready to go home. And guys like me just coming in and saying, oh man, what am I getting into? And so that was kind of an interesting situation. There wasn't much progress in the kind of facilities we had. They're still living in tents in 1966 when I got there. One of the things that always griped me was, you know, Americans are used to mowing grass with lawnmowers, and we always had a lot of people hired, local people hired. Instead of giving them a lawnmower, they give them a pair of scissors and make them go around cutting grass with scissors. Here's this woman sitting there cutting that grass. I just could never understand the logic of that. Then, of course, the officers had their own latrines, which I'm not sure what the enlisted people had, but I don't think they had their own latrines. Nowadays, some of you people are in the military more recently. I think we don't discriminate any longer, do we? Everybody uses the same facilities. I think that's the way it is. It used to be restricted. Okay. Here's the Mohawk. When I first got over my second tour, I started flying east. And here's that thing that looked like a telephone pole I was telling you about. And each night I would take off about 10 o'clock. And by the way, flying at night over Vietnam is not too much fun because you know if you go down, probably there's no hope of ever finding you. But anyhow, had an observer in the right seat, and so I take off about 10 o'clock and fly along the Cambodian and the Laotian border, flying north, and looking out to the side about 30 miles and see if we caught any moving targets. If we picked up any, we would immediately phone the coordinates into the artillery. And keep in mind, the province chiefs had curfews on in all their provinces, so that at 10 o'clock, if you were out after that, you're asking for trouble. So we always flew after 10 o'clock, and I think we phoned in a lot of coordinates and a lot of artillery shot, and we're not quite exactly sure what happened as a result of it. Then after that, they claimed they were short of helicopter pilots, so I hadn't had much helicopter flying time at that time. So they started me off in H-13, I call it the bubble. Jan called it the little rattle trap because she knew I had to make 2 forced landings and a couple of them. And one of them, oil went out of it, the other, the cooling belt went out of it. So I never did like to fly those things very much. But anyhow, after a short time of those, I got to flying the real airplanes, which is the Huey. And initially, I flew the brigade commanders who were bird colonels and their staffs. And it's not just flying around for the fun of it. It was always in operations where we had operations going on. I want to go back here just a second. One day I landed, and these 2 guys came up, and they were begging for cigarettes. And I said, how old are you guys? And over 16. Well, this guy might have been. I'm pretty sure he wasn't, but I wasn't going to give him one. I thought, oh, well, that's okay. So he's already got his going in there. So I'm sorry people in the back can't see this too well. We didn't expect this many people, I don't think. 2 major strategies that we were operating under. The first was search and destroy, where we would, based on intelligence, knew where there were some units coming, the bad guys, either regular North Vietnamese or Viet Cong, and we would design an operation to go land in the area and search them out and take whatever we could find. And then the second was pacification, where we would literally descend on a village that we thought was heavily infested with VC, and at first light we'd go in and surround it and segregate all the men out, the men who were of age to fight, and interrogate them and so on. Then move these people to a safe area and claim to give them security so the bad guys wouldn't move in, and give them medical help and this, that, and the other. Well, to be honest with you, neither one worked very well. I'll tell you more about it here in just a moment. But here's what a search and destroy operations usually started off at. Usually it has some intelligence that there's something going on here or over here in the jungle somewhere. But we always needed an open area where we could land the helicopters. That's the way we got the troops in, was flying them in and with slicks and landing them, then making them walk out to where the area was of operation. Then, before an operation, our division always bombarded the perimeter of this landing area with all kinds of artillery, and we brought the Air Force in, dropping lots of bombs to try to make sure that it was a safe landing area. And in spite of all that, if there's Vietnam veterans here, you'll know that there's always some machine gunner that survived it, and always a few people who were shooting rifles that survived it too. So that was always kind of interesting to me that they could survive that. And then they started bringing the troops in. These were kind of bare bone helicopters, and we called them slicks, and they carried anywhere from 6 to 8 or 9 people, depending on the temperature and so on. And the minute they hit the ground, they would bail out, and the helicopters would get out of there as fast as they possibly could, because that was kind of a vulnerable situation to be in. And these guys didn't go, I can't get this right here, go find their unit. A couple of the early operations I was on, we brought the division engineers in and brought bulldozers in, because we always had a problem. Once we got guys in the jungle, how do you resupply them? You can't get a helicopter in through the jungle anymore. So they'd come in and push out a big area where clear it out so where we could get in with the helicopters to bring supplies in and take wounded out, I might say. That was always a major effort too. Then once the helicopter, or once the bulldozer people got finished with that, they usually have time to have a little fun. And this is out in the middle of the jungle. And by the way, let me go back to this just a minute. These are all craters made by B-52s. I don't know if you remember what was going on with the B-52s or not, but they were coming out of Guam and just carpet bombing. I saw the figures sometime that we dropped way more bombs weight-wise in Vietnam than we did in all of World War II. It was just incredible. And yet, with all that bombing, you could still find people in tunnels underneath there. You could find other operations they completely missed. So it's really kind of disconcerting. Okay. So these guys carved out of the jungle with their bulldozers, the emblem of the 1st Infantry Division. They also carved out some words that could be read from the air, too, that aren't fit for public consumption. So I didn't put those in here. Then we had some pretty successful operations the first several months I was there. These are some of the weapons that were captured in one of the first operations I was on. By the way, this is the old Michelin. We basically took over the old Michelin plantation, rubber plantation. And this was the research lab right here. But we took the whole works over and used it as headquarters for one of our brigades, and then the division worked out of there when we were having an operation too. So, but if you look, you can't see real closely. A lot of these are fairly primitive weapons. They aren't too sophisticated. However, I do see an anti-aircraft weapon there and a couple of other longer range weapons. They always capture a lot of stuff, you know, and capture a lot of hand grenades. These are all hand grenades here that the Vietnamese Viet Cong made. By the way, I have one at home. I almost brought it along, but I've never been quite sure that it's been defused. Still in my desk drawer upstairs. It hasn't gone off yet, but some sergeant sent these guys here over to my helicopter, and they were told, load that stuff in his helicopter and he'll fly it out of here. And you can't see, well, there I am. And I said, no way, you're putting that stuff in my helicopter, because who knows if there's a loose pin in one of these things or whatever. And so I won that battle. But anyhow, more captured stuff. Just every time we turn around, capture stuff. Now, the problem is, we'd go into an area and clear out all this stuff, and we just found all kinds of stuff, including rice and so on, and you take it out and then depart. 2 months later, you find out the bad guys are back in there again, doing the same thing they were doing before. I flew General Westmoreland and a lot of other VIPs around, but here's General Westmoreland coming in, sort of in the middle of one of our operations. He liked to get on the ground and see what was going on, although not always sure he knew everything was going on, but here he is talking, he likes to talk to the troops. And just some more of the weapons. These are 82 millimeter mortars. Now, American mortars are 81 millimeter, and you know what that means. If they capture American mortars, they can fire them in their 82 millimeter tubes. But if we got some of theirs, we can't put an 82 millimeter mortar in an 81 millimeter tube. So, found a lot of these things. And then, I don't know why they would have olive drab cotton cloth, but this very clearly says, made in the People's Republic of China, and it was a bolt of OD cotton. And then we found a lot of bicycles that were used to bring supplies down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And more weapons. And some of these are, again, fairly primitive weapons. Some of them look like M1s, maybe. That was the earlier weapon in the United States Army. And here's my machine gunner and my crew chief. The crew chief acts as a machine gunner, too. They got in there and got a couple of good weapons for souvenirs. I don't know if that was legal or not, but they got them. Now, here's something that really make your blood boil. We captured just oodles and oodles, tons and tons and tons of rice. And we used to try to haul it out. We'd sling load this stuff out. It became a losing battle. You just couldn't get it out fast enough before the operation was over, you know. So they started just tearing the bags open and burying it and hoping that would degrade it to the point where the bad guys couldn't use it anymore. But I want to show you something here. Probably some of you have heard of USAID. That's their symbol, USAID, United States Agency for International Development. They supply less developed countries with all kinds of stuff like rice and others. Here the Viet Cong, having a bag of rice, came from Houston, Texas, but was given to USAID originally, apparently. So, strange things. They didn't waste too much. They made their sandals out of used tires, just cut a slice out of an old used tire, and if they had an inner tube, cut the inner tube up and make the straps for it. And now, this is interesting. This is my machine gunner. It's my second machine gunner, Chai. Can you all see what that is? I don't know why that would have been found in the captured supplies, but there it was. So I think he took it home with him, probably. I don't know. I probably shouldn't have shown this slide. Jan doesn't have me showing these things. But what do you do when you have a whole bunch of dead people? And in this case, we had bulldozers, so we buried them. But in their case, a lot of times they would bury our people. It was just a few. And in some cases, we know that they dug their own graves before they went to battle. And so you had a lot of situations like that. Okay, this next stuff is what probably upset me more than anything else that I was involved in, called the pacification. I mentioned it earlier. The U.S. troops and the Vietnamese army would surround a village at first light, one they suspected had a lot of BC in it. Any adult male who tried to run was captured or shot. The entire village is rounded up. Adult males captured and interrogated, village is burned, and then people relocated to a new housing area. Again, the idea was to get them away from the bad guys, protect them, give them medical care, give them security, and so on, and we have a nice, safe village then. This is the one we operate in. This is one of the first ones I was on, I think. And this is the bubble of my helicopter right here. But these are all the older people and the women and the kiddies over here that have been pulled out of their village. Just a sidebar here. We made the mistake of landing right in these people's garden. And I was sitting with my co-pilot, whose name is Wimpy Pybus. That's his real name, Wimpy Pybus. And I said, gosh, Wimpy. And he was flying at the time. I said, we landed right in this pickle patch. He said, pickle patch? What's that? I said, you know, where you grow pickles? He said, those are cucumbers, you dummy. And my mother always called them pickle patch, so she always called them pickles and hens are pickle patch. But anyhow, I wasn't too proud of landing in their garden like that. But then here are some of the adult males. They blindfold them and then take them away for interrogation and so on and so forth. And it's kind of a sad situation. This is one that we captured. We were flying, and I was flying the brigade commander at the time, a bird colonel, and this guy was riding a bicycle away from the village. We had surrounded the village, but he got out, riding a bicycle, and had a package on the carrier on the back. And my colonel said, he's got a bomb on the back of that bicycle. We got to stop him. And so we hovered down, thought we could blow him down, and that didn't work too well. And finally, the colonel got exasperated. He said, just make him dance, get those machine guns going. And so we did, and finally jumped off his bicycle, and somebody got him. And long story short, he was a school teacher, and he had a bag of books on his carrier. So, that's the kind of thing you run into. That doesn't make them feel too good when that kind of thing happens. And then here's all the kiddies and the people that were younger than the people that were not interrogated and captured. And you got to think just a moment, how would I feel if I lived in St. Marie and somebody surrounded St. Marie and took me away and took my parents away to interrogate them and so on? I don't think you'd feel very good about it. That's kind of what was happening here. This kid in particular, he just has almost a hateful look on his face. And I would almost be willing to bet you that he sided with the Viet Cong sometime in the future, because he was ticked off, you could tell. Then, of course, 1st Infantry Division always tried to placate people by bringing in the band, and so you can't see very well, but here's the bass drum, there's a trumpet player, and there's other band members up there playing to kind of make them feel good after we got them, hold them up there in the hot sun all day, and I don't think it succeeded too well. Then, of course, the next step was to take away the people that weren't held for interrogation and take them to a new area, and you can see we got a truck loaded up there getting ready to go. And then whatever supplies they could load in, they couldn't take very many supplies, but they took a few along with them. And then then they burned the village. So these villages had thatched roofs, and they were pretty good for the climate and so on. But here's what we took them to. The village was under construction with sheet metal roofs, no insulation. It had to be highly uncomfortable under those kind of things. And in fact, in this particular one, they didn't have enough unfinished that they could live in them, so we had to pitch a lot of tents actually to make enough room for them. This has nothing much to do with the operation, except that we flew into an army of Viet Nam, South Vietnamese army place one day, and all these young boys came out, and you might note that they're really pretty well groomed, dressed pretty nicely and so on, because they were all sons of fairly well-to-do people in the military. Whereas when the general public came up, you get a lot of people that had sores, the kids had sores on them and really in pretty bad shape. Okay, just a few unfortunate incidents here. Martyrs. There's hardly a night went by that the Viet Cong were popping martyrs on somebody. And this is in Viet Nam, and they built these concrete bunkers. And here's an A-1 Skyraider. That was the World War II airplane the Vietnamese were flying, actually. Must have got a direct hit on it, just completely destroyed it. This is one of our Mohawks that ran off the runway and messed up the landing gear and actually bent the props and wiped out landing gear and bent the nose a little bit. Here's my crew and I had just sat down. We were getting out of the airplane, and this Jolly Green Giant, Air Force big helicopter, came in. And I could see he lost his tail rotor. He started to spin. And the proper procedure when you're a helicopter pilot is to cut the power and auto-rotate. And he didn't do that, because if you know anything about helicopters, you know the big rotor, if you didn't have the tail rotor, the big rotor just makes the helicopter spin. The tail rotor counteracts that and keeps it straight. When the tail rotor goes, it's going to start spinning. And so he tried to set it down on the rubber tires and got it bouncing. The next thing you know, the rotor started hitting the ground. Here's a piece of it. A piece of it flew right over by our helicopter. And nobody was hurt. I went over to the fire extinguisher and thought I was going to have a fire for sure. Then here's a flying crane that the Army has, which is big enough to pick up that big old helicopter and take it away and hopefully get it fixed. Here's Andy, our machine gunner. He's got a piece of shrapnel there. It was red hot, but this is our own artillery that started landing around us. We were near a big tree, and we grabbed that tree and hugged it the best we could, but there's always something like that going on, and a lot of friendly fire hit a lot of our folks. Now this, I didn't get into the main base very often, but once in a while I'd get in. One night I was in, and I'm just leaving the officers club, and this big explosion took place just right in front of me. And I jumped into this place. It was a makeshift bomb shelter. They had these 4-foot corrugated metal tiles. They put in the ground a little ways and put sandbags around them. And before I knew it, everybody in the officers club emptied out and practically smothered me because they thought we were getting mortared. But in fact, what it was a drunk GI that threw a hand grenade in the back of this military police jeep. For what reason, I don't know, but this is the next morning, and of course it blew the tire and ruined the seats and blew the top off of it and so on. But this that's called fragging, and fragging was not very common when I was there, but for veterans I know who went later, fragging was pretty darn common. It's your own people trying to get your commanding officer and whatever. Then the runway I was flying off of, my second tour with the Mohawks, it was built by the Japanese. And by the way, I meant to mention that most of the buildings we were using on my first tour were built by the Japanese. The Japanese occupied Vietnam during the Second World War, in case you all didn't know that. But we were blowing a tire about every day or so, and I had one blow one time right on takeoff. And the question always arose, when you got one blown on takeoff, do you go ahead and take off, or do you hit full reverse thrust and try to stop before you get to the other runway? I decided to hit reverse thrust, and fortunately I got it stopped. A friend of mine always argued with me, no, better off to take off, come back and land with a flat tire. He tried that and wiped out the landing gear, so I think I won that argument. Now here's bad guys blew a Bailey Bridge, and George Kurtz is going to love this because he helped build. Did you build Bailey Bridges down at Fort Benning?
Not Float Bridge, Fort Benning, but I did it at Atterbury.
Oh, Atterbury, okay. At any rate, they pretty much put this one out of commission, and we had an operation going on. We needed that bridge desperately, and so the engineers came out and started working. You see them working down here, and a day later, they had a new Bailey Bridge across there, and then one of our generals did the cut the tape, grand opening of it, and then the other thing was of note probably was the 82 millimeter mortars they fired practically every night did a fair amount of damage. Then we started getting hit by 122 millimeter rockets, and they did a lot more damage. And you could stand off 3 or 4 miles with one of these, whereas with 82 millimeters, I understand it, you can only stand off a mile or 2 miles. You can see the kind of hole this one left, and I always found it interesting. This guy right here seems to be more interested in hole in the ground. So, just a few miscellaneous happenings. Our engineers built a runway right in the jungle. This is the engineer, battalion commander, and the sad story about him is he was a fantastic individual. And 7 days before he was ready to go home, we got a call that the Huey had crashed, and we went over there as quickly as we could. He and his entire staff had hit a guy wire with a Huey and just completely disintegrated the whole thing. So, at any rate, they built this. Before that, they built this runway out of the jungle. Here's the first C-123 landing on it. I suppose it's grown up jungle by now, probably. Here's the crew I flew with the general. Here was the chief sergeant and the commanding sergeant major. Here's the general's aide. Here's the machine gunner. Here's General Hay. Here's me. And this is a colonel that I didn't like very well. He didn't like me very well. But he was a lieutenant colonel, and he was a West Pointer. And within 4 years after leaving here, he was a 4-star general, and went on to bigger and better things. This is Wimpy Pivot's my pilot. I'm a co-pilot, and this is Specialist Smith, my mechanic and machine gunner, actually. Okay, got a few decorations. This was a Distinguished Flying Cross I got fairly early on. This was a Bronze Star. This is maybe here you get a better picture of him. Outstanding pilot. We did have some interesting entertainment. Bob Hope Show came, and Christmas is 1966, and that's Phyllis Diller there, in case anybody remembers her. Performing. Several thousand people here. What we had to do with the helicopters was escort the various convoys into this thing, and we had a truce, supposedly. And going in, truce is okay, but by the time we were taking these people, escorting them back, the bad guys had started shooting again, so truces weren't very reliable. Then in 1998, Jan and I and our two adult sons decided to go and see what things look like over there. We never talked much about Vietnam, and Jan had always said, well, when we get diplomatic relations and when things settle down, we will see if we can go back. So '98, our sons came to us. One had just finished medical school, the other was getting ready to enter law school, and they said, we got about a 10-day window, I guess, or something like that. And so I found on the internet a couple of XGIs that were conducting tours. So I got a hold of them and lined up a tour. I think we were there maybe between a week and 10 days. I'm not exactly sure how long. Anyhow, they're still using ox carts just like they were back when I was there before. We went to the Train Beach, which at the time I thought it was the most beautiful beach in the world, but it's not been taken care of too well. But our boys found out that in the early morning there was huge crowds came out to the beach, and I don't know if it's some kind of ceremony or something they had.
Exercises.
Oh, exercising, I guess that's what it was, and I forgot. Yeah, thank you. And then we couldn't find any of the landmarks. A lot of, like one of the airfields we operated out of had been built over, it's now a housing area. We did find this runway at Lai Cay, which is in the, where the Mission Plantation was, but that's all that's left of the runway. This is our son Eric, the oldest son. And the labs had all been renovated, and it looked like the rubber trees had all been cut down, but now they're growing up, and so it looks like there's new life happening there where we worked out of for so long. Here we are in front of the defunct U.S. Embassy in Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, I guess it's called now. Eric and I got there a little bit ahead of time. Jan didn't see this, but they're still doing things the old-fashioned way. Here they're harvesting rice, cut it by hand. When it dries, they bang it against these backboards to get the grain out of it, and I presume bag it in. Here's the way they harvest peanuts, and you might note again, ladies, it's all women doing the work, so nothing's changed. And then Eric and I came across these ducks for sale along the side of the road, and this guy here's paid for his duck. He's got a plastic bag there. He's going to have duck for dinner, looks like. Then Eric talked me into going to the Cu Chi tunnels, and I didn't really want to go, but I decided to go. But they were built for tiny little people, and they enlarged them slightly, and not enough for a 6'1" guy hardly, but that's me trying to squeeze through the tunnels. And then all of a sudden, and there's times when you literally had to get on your hands and knees and crawl, all of a sudden it opened into this big cavern, and here was a headquarters and an operating room. And they had all kinds of primitive saws and things to saw limbs off, I guess, of human beings. At any rate, the strange thing was, it was right beneath the Cu Chi airport, where I had flown into many times, and none of us had any idea that there were Viet Cong underneath the headquarters.
It was their hospital.
I'm sorry?
It was their hospital.
Yeah, this is the operating room. And then right outside of that operation, they had a place where you could buy rounds for a M16 or an AK-47 and go out on the range and shoot them. And so I was a big spender. I bought one round for me. They were $1 a round, and one round for Eric and the M16. You could tell these guys were really ticked off. Here's these rich Americans. They thought we were going to buy 50 or 100 rounds, you know. So anyhow, I went out to shoot mine, and he didn't like what I was doing. I'm not sure what he was yelling at me about something. And anyhow, I fired my one round and left. They had captured a helicopter, and it sure makes me wonder if it wasn't one of my best friends that went down there. And we were on operation, and we both stopped at Cu Chi to refuel, and he took off ahead of me. And I heard a little bit later that he had a mayday, he was in trouble. And turned out he was shot down, and it was really rough territory. And the powers that be landed they took a helicopter and they couldn't land, but they let a rope down and they verified all 4 bodies were dead. And so they made the decision they couldn't get it out of them, but they'd do it the next operation. Well, then they sent letters home to his wife was he was missing in action, and that kind of upset me because he had a good friend there also, and we thought it was giving false hope to his wife because all we folks knew he was dead. Anyhow, they eventually got the bodies out and left the helicopter there. Okay, this will be the last slide here. Some of the lessons learned, I think, is don't send U.S. military to fight guerrilla war in another country. That's my opinion, at least. Don't underestimate the power of guerrilla fighters. Some of these people were just unbelievable the way they fought. And not that our own people didn't fight well, they did, but they had, many times they were against all odds. Air power, I tell you, you just cannot tell the good people from the bad people in a situation like this. And when you start harming more good people than bad people, you start losing the war. Avoid metrics that lead to false and misleading statistics. In other words, body count. The last time I flew General Westmoreland in Vietnam, he was sitting so that I could look him right in the eye. And he was telling my boss, the 2-star general, he said, "John, we got to do something about these body counts." He said, "If we had killed as many people as we had officially reported," he said, "there wouldn't be anybody left in this country." But then we were on this, at the time we were on this operation, it was really slow, and then finally my boss said to him, "Well, do you think we can leave this area now? We don't have much luck finding anything." And he said, "No, you can't leave here until you get 2,500 body counts." So guess what happened? We started getting body counts real fast. I mean, not real, but they turned out to be official. But anyhow, and one of my pet peeves. And then training locals to fight, but don't do it for them. That's where we made a big mistake. It turned out that eventually we were doing all the fighting, and they just were standing back and watching. I like to use the analogy of our Sheltie dog that we have. She's perfectly healthy. We have a fairly steep basement stairway, and she'll go down there, and it used to be she'd trot right back up. And she finally started balking, and she found out if she balked long enough, I would carry her up. Now when she goes down, there's no way in heck she's going to go. She's always waiting for me to carry her up, and I think that's kind of what happened in Vietnam. They found we would do everything, and all they had to do is wait, and we'd take care of it.